Hey, deserving listeners, last resort, 90-day fiancé. Let's see what happens.
All
right, put your hand on his chest.
Okay, so as with Ed, when he non-consensually was flashing people, exposing himself to people, I would say the same thing to Asuelu. I don't know. I mean, it would be unlikely that Asuelu asked everyone if it was okay. Maybe the previous day, hey, you know, if I take off my pants and expose my genitals to you, how maybe it was just like a note he passed around, like yes, no, maybe. Sometimes I say things and I'm like, oh, for sure this is going to end up in one of those clips that people like to pull from my videos. But anyway, c'est la vie. So anyway, my point is that I'm guessing that Asuelu did not get any kind of consent that was obvious. There's a chance that Ed and Asuelu had very good information to know that this sort of thing would be, at the very least, not traumatizing to others. You know, like they might know enough. I doubt that they know it, but when in doubt, don't do this. There are a lot of really important conversations about consent and not harming other people in these ways. And I am all for those conversations. They're not hard to have. You know, when these kinds of topics were introduced, it was, 10, 15 years ago, and all the conservatives, or people that are, a lot of men were saying like, what? So I'm supposed to just have like a contract every time I want to make out with someone? I got to like have a lawyer there, and we have to have a sit down, we have to sign papers. And me and everyone else is like, no, just say, is it okay do you want to kiss? Or do you want to go to my room? Or would you like to start getting down? Would you like to go to third base? Anyway, but my point is that with people you don't know that well, then when in doubt, ask, for more definitive consent from people, unambiguous consent. So the other thing that and I'll say this when I said it with Ed, is that you can see the crowd reaction. This is actually a good point to make for the world to internalize. I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but just because everyone's laughing and smiling and no one's going, oh, that's traumatizing me, doesn't mean that someone isn't being traumatized. And a lot of people who have traumas around these sorts of things, or any sort of trauma, have learned that people will shame them or harm them even more if they let on that they're suffering in some way. Our society isn't good about this, blah, blah, blah. So the thing that I just want to point out is that there's a high rate of people who have been sexually abused for people of all genders. Generally speaking, the rate is higher for women and girls, children who are girls, but that does not mean that there aren't a sizable number of men and boys who have also been sexually abused. Plus, the research on the prevalence of this is hampered by the fact that many men and boys don't even frame what they went through as abuse. I mean, everyone of every gender, but particularly for boys. I mean, there are whole swaths of our population, especially when you think about the planet, that think it's impossible for a grown man, to be sexually assaulted. So you add that in, it's like, well, what is the real prevalence? So the thing that I just want to really drill into everyone's heads is, regardless of gender, there are higher rates for different, queer people have higher rates. There are higher rates for, certain ethnic groups. But the thing to remember is, if you remember one stat, is just the rate is very high for a lot of people, and for groups of people. And so when someone is traumatized in that way, it depends on how they're traumatized, right? But one of the ways that is a common trauma in this category is that someone will, regardless of gender, because perpetrators come in all genders as well, and that the victim will experience an intrusive act of some kind. And Harvey Weinstein operated this way. Bill Clinton, if you believe the allegation, seems to have also operated this way, where they would just expose themselves, and that would be their way of testing the waters or getting the ball rolling or something. And this happens to kids, and it's a thing. So there can be someone in this circle who has been traumatized in that way and has yet to recover sufficiently from that trauma such that the exposure will not cause significant distress for them. I know people, clients and friends of mine, who, if they were here, undoubtedly they would have been massively triggered. They would not indicate that they were triggered. And for the next month, they would be a wreck. They would be dissociative. They would be in distress. They would shut down. Some of them might turn to substances, marijuana, alcohol, to numb the pain for the time. They would be confused at work. They might even have to call in sick to work. Something like this can be very, very traumatizing. It's not automatically traumatizing, even for people who have been sexually harmed, even unrecovered sexual terror. This might not trigger them because there's a lot of different associations that can be triggering. But that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about like, oh, I'm going to frown on that. That's not okay. Or trigger warning, the way that people will talk and make fun of it as if it's snowflakes being too sensitive. What we're talking about is neurological fact, scientific fact that we have known about for decades, that is a phenomenon that is a product of trauma. And most people are traumatized in some way. A lot of people are traumatized in a lot of ways. And the vast, vast majority of people who have been traumatized have never been through treatment, let alone effective treatment, let alone long enough effective treatment, because the kinds of things that are commonly needing recovery take years of therapy to habituate to, such that a trigger wouldn't trigger you again and cause that severe reaction. And I'm also not talking about trigger warnings triggering being associated with something like, I just don't prefer that. Like, your red jacket triggers me because I don't like the way that it looks. That's not where I hope I'm clear that the original intent of the trigger warning policy or movement was to protect people from having a month of symptoms or longer that even could result in suicide. I mean, that happens sometimes. Someone could get triggered and go down a road, and and they isolate. They don't have access to treatment, and they become hopeless, and that happens. So that's what we're talking about, and I will mention that again here. Do I think that's happening? I don't know. There's no way to know, but I hope it's not. And I just say, Asuelu, there's a lot of ways to be funny. He could have done a striptease without just flashing his thing in front of a lot of people. Today's video is sponsored by Ada. So I got COVID recently. It was probably the sickest I've ever been in my entire life. It was the worst. Well, did you know there are treatments you can take for COVID-19? And that means that there's something you can do if you get COVID, things you can do to avoid getting really sick. And that's where Ada comes in. You take their free questionnaire online. I've taken it. It's confidential. And you find out if you or a loved one may be eligible for treatment. If eligible, you can talk to a clinician via telehealth within 2 hours. And if prescribed, you can pick up your treatment from a local pharmacy. So click the link below to find out if you are eligible and learn more about treatment options. And I want to add, I've said this, of course, but I just want to emphasize that we're not just talking about the women. The men could also be triggered by this. It could be that they were assaulted, something like this, or that they witnessed their mom being assaulted, or, there's a lot of different things that could be happening.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Your penis.
It's gonna catch on fire.
You can burn a towel.
Oh my God.
I will point out that it looks like Ed is the only one not having fun. I don't know why that is. He's covering Liz's face. I don't know what's going on there. Does he actually feel threatened, traumatized, trauma-wise, or is he jealous, like he doesn't want... Yeah, I imagine that for Ed, given how quick he is to become jealous, I think because of some abandonment trauma that we haven't at least heard elaborated on, that he would be triggered by this, that he would... I mean, there was that phone call where he was very, very triggered and abusing Liz for having, because Liz drove a coworker home. And so, then that, I don't know, it was last season or 2 seasons ago, where at their engagement party, he saw Liz having a verbal fight that was quite aggressive with another woman, like a former coworker or something. And Ed's paranoia convinced him that Liz and the other woman had an affair, had a relationship in the past. It's like that, if you've ever had a jealous spouse who was severe, you know that pattern where anything and everything that could be possibly interpreted as evidence of cheating, they will see it that way. It's a product of preoccupied attachment, potentially disorganized attachment, but the distortion is there, and their hypervigilance is their main defensive act, that they will constantly stay, preoccupied attachment, anxious attachment. The reason why they label it that is because they are constantly preoccupied. They're constantly anxious about attachment loss and have developed a strategy neurologically since they were 18 months old that is typified by hypervigilance and being paranoid. They believe neurologically, they made a choice subconsciously that in order to stay safe, they have to assume that bad things are happening, abandonment, cheating, betrayal, because if they don't assume it, then they won't react to it fast enough. But of course, when they assume it, then they end up reacting to things that are not actually of that nature. Okay, well, let's adjourn there. Tune in next time when I continue watching, if you care to. And everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.